Welcome and thank you for standing by. Today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. All participants are in listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. At that time, you may press star 1 to ask a question. I would now like to turn the call over to Catherine Hamilton. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm Catherine Hamilton with NASA's Office of Communications. NASA's SLS rocket and Orion spacecraft arrived back at Kennedy's Vehicle Assembly Building April 26th after a 10-hour journey from the launch pad 39B. Since their arrival, teams have worked to make repairs and perform additional checkouts while the spaceport supplier of gaseous nitrogen makes upgrades to their system to support Artemis 1 activities. Here to talk with us about the path forward are Jim Free, Associate Administrator for the Exploration Systems Development Mission Director at NASA headquarters in Washington, and Cliff Lanham, Senior Vehicle Operations Manager for NASA's Exploration Ground Systems Program at Kennedy. After brief opening comments from each of our speakers, we'll take your questions. You can enter star 1 on your phone to be entered into the question queue at any time. Your phones are on mute now, and the operator will open your mic when you're ready and close your mic after you ask your question. We ask that you please stick to one question and identify to whom your question is directed. And shortly after we conclude, you can listen to a replay of this teleconference online. So first we will hear from Jim Free. Jim?
Great. Thanks, Catherine, and good afternoon, everybody. I really appreciate your continued interest in Artemis and in this case specifically Artemis 1. And I'm here to make sure that you have the chance to hear from me today about where things are at. I'm usually not the type to shy away from giving the folks that really do the hard work the chance to have a break, which is what we're trying to do today, but looks like Cliff drew the short straw and is here with me today to answer the tough questions. So let's first talk about rolling back. Rolling back to the VAB was absolutely the right thing to do to really work through several issues that we found at the pad, as well as to let our partners at Air Liquide do the work they need to do on the repairs for the nitrogen. And I'll remind everybody, and we have a clean pad philosophy on this program and with KSC, so that really limits our some of the access we have out at the pad. So yet another reason that we decided to roll back. The repairs at Air Liquide are progressing on track and currently scheduled to complete and do our verification soon, which will be to the actual conditions for both wet dress and launch, probably around the May 11th timeframe. Our United Launch Alliance partner did replace the check valve over the weekend, and we inspected the valve and did find a small piece of rubber that was preventing this check valve from sealing correctly, and we are looking at the sources that debris could have come from. We didn't see any issues at all with the valve, which is really good news, and Cliff can talk more about some of the additional testing that we're doing. On the hydrogen leak that we saw when we went from slow to fast fill during the last wet dress, we've narrowed that down to a couple causes, and Cliff and his team are continuing to work through those this week, and I know he'll talk about how that work is progressing as well. Relative to schedule, so we're still looking at the schedule as Cliff and his folks work through things and that schedule when we can get back out to the pad. And we're looking right now at that next wet dress in the early to mid-June timeframe. We may update that as the other work progresses. Some of these things are a constraint to roll back out, so we need to look at how that work goes, and certainly we'll continue to keep you updated on that work and the schedule. I'm sure you heard the administrator and associate administrator mention the possibility of that that August Artemis 1 launch during their Crew 4 news conference last week. And as we've been saying, we'll set that official launch date after we get through wet dress. But based on some of the historical challenges from similar programs over the years and the schedule performance that we've seen thus far, we are looking at a couple launch periods through the August timeframe. That schedule has margin in it in the work that we do, and also to allow us to do 2 wet dress rehearsal attempts if we need them. We are optimistic that we only need 1 more based on everything we've been able to do thus far to fine-tune our tanking procedures. But we also want to be realistic and upfront with you that it may take more than 1 attempt to get the procedures where we need them for a smoother launch count that gives us the best chance to making our launch windows when we get to the launch day. Tom Whitmire in the past has talked about the intricate choreography of all the variables involved with tanking a new rocket for the first time, and I know Charlie Blackwell Thompson and Mike Serafin have talked a bit about how activities compare with programs like the Space Shuttle and Saturn V. So I want to share a few of the historical facts that folks have pulled together. For Apollo, there was a test vehicle that was used to do wet dress and ring out the systems, both flight and ground. That was out at the pad with multiple wet dress rehearsals for about 5 months. Apollo 4 rolled out to the pad in August of '67 and did a countdown demonstration test. Did an initial tanking in early October and finally completed the test in mid-October and launched in early November. For the shuttle, it rolled out to the first pad at the end of December in 1980 and did separate hydrogen and oxygen tanking in late January, and a countdown demonstration test in mid-February with flight readiness firing all the way on the 20th of February. They also conducted a tanking test in late March, ran into a few issues, and did another attempt in late March as well. That next tanking was for launch, and after a scrub on April 10th, finally launched April 12th. So you get a sense that with the shuttle, in this case being at the pad like 3.5 months, and the time the Apollo test vehicle was at the launch pad, it is a challenge to work these new systems and these complicated vehicles. So we certainly own where our program is, but I think we're in family of where we've been in the past. So with that, let me turn it over to Cliff to let you know about the work that is happening in the VAB today and what we're going to do to get back to the pad to move us forward.
Thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. So the Space Launch System rocket with the Orion spacecraft arrived back at the Vehicle Assembly Building on April 26th, as was mentioned. And then our teams really got to work, and we've done a lot of work to get the rocket ready to roll back out to the launch pad. So far, we've replaced the faulty helium check valve that was located on the interim cryopropulsion stage. That's the second stage. And as Jim mentioned, it's been sent over for inspection, and we're still diving into the root cause there of the contamination that was holding the check valve open. We're planning on testing the newly installed check valve later this week if we get to a resolution on that root cause and get the clearance to go ahead and hook everything back up and test. For the most part, the hardware is about, I would say, 80% installed, and we're looking to finish up the installation of the hardware this afternoon, internal to the vehicle, and then we'll await that final go from the technical team to say that we're good to go ahead and test. Aside from the check valve, our teams have also performed tests to determine where the hydrogen leak on the tail service mast umbilical was coming from. And again, that umbilical is located on the mobile launcher and connected to the core stage of the rocket. So we've conducted leak checks on all the joints in that area, and what we've determined is that the compression on the gasket, basically that's between the flanges of the fill line, were relaxing, which basically alleviated some of the torque and loosened up the bolts, and hence we feel that's probably your most likely cause of the leak there. So what we've done is we've been performing retorques in 30-hour increments. That's a shuttle lesson learned that we've incorporated, and so they have been retorquing. And right as of this time, the hydrogen TSMU is complete, and we also went ahead and looked at similar designs on the other umbilicals. So the core stage intertank umbilical, as well as the oxygen tail service mass umbilical, have a very similar design. So we went ahead and we've also retorqued those arms. As of now, we haven't detected any leaks, but again, that's not uncommon when trying to detect leaks at air temperature instead of the super cold temperatures of the cryogenics when we load at the launch pad. But again, we feel we've done what we can do at this point. The next test will be when we flow cryos out at the launch pad. We've also performed some other closeout work on areas of the rocket that we would need to do in any case. And we've been doing work to try and avoid any kind of interference with our main effort, which was to fix the issues we had that constrained wet dress rehearsal and get back out to the pad as quickly as possible. But we have been able to accomplish other work in parallel. So that's been a great effort by the team. Also, as was mentioned earlier, the gaseous nitrogen supplier, Air Liquide, that supplies us nitrogen, has been upgrading its facility to meet our requirements for our next wet dress rehearsal. And as of now, as Jim mentioned, they're on target for a May 9th completion of their effort of the mods and their testing, and then there will be a extended test performed to make sure it meets the SLS and Orion requirements that we'll need for WDR, wet dress rehearsal, as well as launch. So once we complete all this major work, we'll retract all our working platforms inside the VAB, close out the volumes in the vehicle that we had to go into when we came back to the VAB. I'd like to reference this stop in the VAB as a pit stop. Come back in, do what we need to do, and get back out to the pad as quickly as possible. So, and we're working hard to meet that goal and try to roll out in the mid to late May timeframe, as we basically stated when we rolled back. That was our target. And with that, I'll pass it back to Catherine.
Thank you, Cliff. We'll now begin the question and answer portion. Please stick to one question and identify to whom it is directed. If we have time, we'll allow reporters to ask a second question. Again, you can enter *1 on your phone to be entered into the queue at any time, and you can enter *2 if you'd like to be removed from the queue. Our first question will be from Marcia Dunn of the Associated Press.
Yes, hello. I'm wondering, what are the launch windows in August, and will it take pretty much a really clean wet dress rehearsal to be able to meet August? Thanks.
Yeah, I think, Marcia, first let me answer the second half of your question. We have very clear objectives that we need to work through for the wet dress. We worked through a number of those. I think Charlie has indicated some of that in the past of what we've been able to do. We need to get the vehicle tanked and get to a replenish mode. So from my perspective, when we get through that, then we'll be ready to say, you know, wet dress is complete. As far as windows, we do have our launch period 24 is the early part of August. We do have to make sure we work with the range on any of these, by the way, and particularly one of those is the Psyche mission in there, which has a pretty clear launch window. And then launch period 25 begins towards the end on August 23rd. So those are the two in August. 24 starts in July, but those are the early August and late August timeframes for launch period 24 and 25.
Our next question is from Bill Harwood of CBS News.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill Harwood. For Jim, I'm curious when you think the export control issue will be resolved. I mean, you know, you've had an SLS countdown in one form or another for many, many months, if not years. And so I think it's a little hard for some of us to understand why we can't get more details at this point, or why PAO isn't allowed to provide real-time coverage from the firing room given the time that's passed. I mean, just as a point of reference, you know, NASA used to hand out shuttle countdown bar charts before each flight. And it's pretty hard to understand why one was okay and this one isn't, especially given it's the same engines and essentially the same cryo system. So I'm just curious when this might get resolved, because it's hard for us to understand. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And I probably should move a little further away from Catherine before I answer this question. Certainly we've heard your and others' concerns about the launch count and what we can share. I can tell you that for wet dress, we're actually using those as our test case as to how the team uses the loops. I think you remember from Shuttle, the launch director loop and the NASA test director loop, and then we had anomaly loops that never made their way out for Shuttle. So we're trying to use wet dress to say, first of all, we need to get further into the count than we've been able to get thus far to understand everything that comes across the loops. We're having our PAO folks participate in the wet dress. We're recording those so we can kind of go back and say, what can we really make available for launch? We're looking at historical launches, Shuttle, other government launches as to what's out there. And we're looking at what can we have from a commentary perspective over the parts where the export control folks are worried about what might be shared. So I can tell you that as recent as, I can't remember now, the rigs run together yesterday or today, I shared a couple links to some launch commentary with folks so we can really understand what we can and can't share, and we'll work closely with the export control folks. But I certainly understand your concern and the history there, Bill, and want to tell you that we're working to give the best coverage we can when it comes time for launch.
Thank you. Our next question is from Philip Sloss of NASA Spaceflight.
Thanks. I think this is for Cliff. I believe that I'd heard that there were gaskets on either side of the debris plate on that flange connection. This is regarding the hydrogen leak. Was it one of those gaskets or both of them? And was this flange connection serviced or rechecked after the umbilical retract release test back in September? Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. So yes, there are two gaskets. They're called fluorogreen gaskets. I believe that's the manufacturer's name for those gaskets. And yes, they were torqued prior to the umbilical release and retract test. Unfortunately, however, they were not re-torqued prior to rolling out for WDR. So it's a good lesson learned for us. Our engineering community has been really working this very hard, and basically has determined that any cryo flows from now on, we will basically be getting back in there and retorquing these bolts each time. So you are correct in saying that they were not retorqued after URRT, but again, lesson learned, and the community is going to school on that, and we do plan to retorque after each cryo flow.
Thank you. Our next question is from Eric Berger of Ars Technica.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the update on this. Question for Jim Free. This week, the administrator said cost-plus contracts were, and I quote, a plague on NASA. Obviously, you can't change the contracts already led for SLS and Orion, and I think the ground systems as well, the mobile launch tower. But can you talk a little bit about whether future exploration systems contracts are going to be awarded in fixed price, given sort of this change in attitude? Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. And you know, when we look at our acquisition process, we really try and balance the risk of what we're trying to buy and its maturity versus what acquisition strategies contract types are available to us, and make the best choice. I think you've seen what we've tried to do with landers. Obviously, there's a lot of history with fixed price in other parts of human spaceflight. And then when we pick it, you know, it's our job as NASA to manage our contractors, regardless of the type that we have, and in some cases manage ourselves too, right? In fixed price contracts, we can't be coming in with all kinds of changes because that drives up costs. And then it's our expectation that our contractors, with our management, our contractors perform to it. So I think we have some recent examples where we've for high dollar value and critical systems like landers, like spacesuits, where we've actually used fixed price. Does that mean we'll never use cost plus again? No, it doesn't. It's let's go back and look at what we're buying and make the best choice that minimizes the risk to the government.
Thank you. Our next question is from Emery Kelly of Florida Today.
Hey, folks. Appreciate you taking the time to do this. Just, I think this might be a question for Cliff. I'm just trying to get a little bit more of a mental visualization, I guess, of what's going on at Air Liquide. Are they a little bit? I mean, they're also supplying and helping out with other launches. Are they a little bit overwhelmed? I mean, where does this kind of stand on their priority list? I would assume it's at the top, if not toward the top. But I'm just trying to get a little bit more on what they're working over at that plant. Thanks.
Yeah, and Emery, what I'd say is, there's been our system, the SLS has a larger demand than because of the size of the vehicle. So there's been workarounds as Air Liquide has taken their system down to continue to provide nitrogen for the whole center. And I would say this is at the top of their priority list. I think somebody said after the last one, they've never done anything that has affected a launch going all the way back through Apollo. So I'm sure there's no group that feels more responsible for this than them and the folks at Kennedy that work with them. So I think it's high at their priority list. There's been nitrogen supplied for the ongoing operations and launches there that will continue to go on. These changes really help us with the large amount that we need for SLS.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jeff Faust of Space News.
Cliff, I just want some clarity on the check valve. The piece of rubber, that's not from the valve itself. It's from some external source, or is that debris something wrong with the valve itself that came loose?
Yeah, I'll let Cliff. It's from external source, but Cliff, do you want to elaborate?
Sure, Jim. Yeah, so they're still investigating that, but there's basically what they're finding. It was found in the ground side of the quick disconnect, where you separate the vehicle from the umbilical arm. And right now, they're still investigating what could be the source of that piece of rubber. And that's all I can really say right now. They're still investigating it, looking at the designs to see if there's any possible location it could have come from. And then, they're checking when we talk about the contamination that we've seen in the check valve and all. They're trying to match up whether this was the source of the contamination particles that we see further upstream.
Thank you. Our next question is from Stephen Clark of Spaceflight Now. I think we may have lost Stephen. Let's see. Can we go to Irene Kloss of Aviation Week?
Thanks, Catherine. Good afternoon. I have two questions. The first for Cliff, do you know when this debris was introduced into the helium check valve? In other words, was there a time in processing where the valve was cycled and you know that there was not debris there, and then, of course, it turned up later? And for Jim, following on Bill's comments and questions, is it your intention to provide live commentary for the next wet dress?
Yeah, Cliff, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I believe it was WDR3. I have to go confirm exactly, but there was a point at which we were trying to pressurize the COPV tanks on the vehicle. That basically provides the helium. The tanks hold the helium that then operate your pneumatic valves and pressurized tanks. So when we were trying to pressurize those, we realized that we weren't getting the pressures we needed to fully pressurize the tanks. And that was the first indication that we had a problem. that we weren't getting enough flow into those tanks. And from there, the investigation started, and basically the result of that was, as we were headed into WDR3, the decision was made that we would not tank the second stage because of this problem, and just tank the first stage, the core stage. And at that point, once we knew we were coming back to the VAB, it was the decision was made that we would go ahead and remove and replace that check valve at that point, so we could do a full WDR once we roll back out.
And Irene, to the second half of your question, for wet dress, we are going to have live commentary.
Thank you. All right, our next question is from Mike Wall of space.com.
Thank you for doing this. Just a quick question. Why you've got the stack down in the VAB and kind of going over it. Like, have you noticed anything else that's interesting or that kind of raised concerns, or is it just these same two issues that kind of cropped up on the pad that have gotten all of your attention?
So what I would say is there's nothing that popped up that is like, wow, that also occurred. Some of the other items that we've been working, we have what we call our kind of our major nonconformances that we knew we needed to work. We've been looking at some areas on the ICPS aft plate purge. Umbilical, we did have some during the WDR, some air intrusion on that boot. So we've been reseating that boot and working that. We did have an area with a GPS tracker inside the ICPS that we feel was a mobile launcher connection. So in other words, from the antenna on the mobile launcher, we weren't getting the signal back into the second stage. And we've been working that problem, and we think we got that resolved, but we need to do a retest here when we power up late this week or early next week. And then in general, we've been, like I said, there's other work we've been doing to try to reduce the amount of work we'll have to do after we come back from the next wet dress rehearsal. There was some TPS foam areas on the core stage that we're fixing. So there's other things that we're doing, again, just trying to get as much work behind us as we can, but we're not letting them become scheduled drivers to getting to the next wet dress rehearsal.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jim Siegel of NASA Tech.
Thank you for taking my question, and good luck in all the repairs that you're doing. I have a question about how many other SLS rockets and Orion capsules are in the system. In other words, how many are going to be built, and how will the construction or the work that's being done on those how will that be affected by what's going on here now in what you're doing after this last dress rehearsal? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we actually have the Artemis 2 capsule and service module at Kennedy right now and undergoing testing. I think the first power on for those is right now targeted at the end of May. The Artemis 3 crew module is pressure shell is down at Kennedy, getting outfitted and undergoing testing as well, along with the European service module is over in Bremen, Germany. So those three are ongoing. Some of the early parts for the next crew module are underway. So I've said it publicly. It's great. We have a hardware-rich program right now in terms of what we have in the queue. And your question about how will what's going on now affect it? This is a test flight that we have with Artemis 1. The reason we're doing this test flight is we need to understand how the hardware works, but also how it comes together. Cliff and his team who've processed this vehicle, and the Orion and SLS teams that have watched their vehicles go through processing have a lot of lessons learned that we want to incorporate for the next vehicles to increase that processing time to a point that fits our model. That gets it to a point that we expect, right? We want to be as efficient as we can to get that increase is more around our flight rate up. And we're going to learn a lot on this mission that then we might need to make a change or two between now and between Artemis 1 and 2. So, getting to a good flight rate from our lessons learned is something we should do between Artemis 1 and 2, and 2 and 3, and 3 and 4. So the effect is tremendous because we will have processed the vehicle.
Thank you. Our next question is from Marcia Smith of Space Policy Online.
Thanks so much. My question is for Jim, and it has to do with the new mobile launcher that you're building. Administrator Nelson was very critical of Bechtel and their work on that one. Can you give us an update on the schedule for the new one? And are you learning anything from the exercise with the current mobile launcher with the wet dress rehearsal that can be applied to that one? For example, on these hydrogen umbilicals, is there some new way of designing them so you don't have to have this retorquing issue on the new mobile launcher?
Yeah, thanks, Marcia. So I'll start with the back end. The retorquing is part of the design because we have soft goods in there, right? And soft goods behave the way soft goods behave. So I think what Cliff said, using the lessons learned from the shuttle, is helping us a lot there. So I think we've optimized it, as I mentioned in the last question. We'll continue to learn from it, and we'll do that. As far as ML2, we work closely with Bechtel all the way up their management chain to continue to get our path and schedule forward on ML2. I wish I could describe to you the priority for me, other than to say that I talk ML2, say, at least once a day, and where we're going. We're working with Bechtel to get a update to their cost and schedule in the late May timeframe, which we're trying to get through our final design, the complexity of this design, and a 12 million pound system that has modes that are induced by the vehicle is incredibly complex. We're looking in the latter part of the summer to finalize the design and move out on the heavy construction pieces. So our next window into a word back from our contractor is the end of May. I will tell you that the team down at Kennedy, led by Daryl Foster, is working every day with Bechtel to drive out the technical issues that remain to get us on a path to have Artemis 4 in a reasonable time frame. But that schedule we have to get from them at the end of May. But I'll tell you, it is a high priority all the way up through, as you noted, right? The administrator is able to talk about it at the hearing, so he is on top of it as well. But it's a big concern for us.
Thank you. Our next question is from George Borski of Gizmodo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for doing this. Jim, you mentioned during your opening comments that you wanted to be realistic and upfront in terms of the upcoming wet dress, indicating that it actually may take more than one attempt to perform this. Now, this, unless I'm mistaken, this is the first time I'm hearing this kind of language, that previously the understanding was that it was just going to be this one attempt and then you would set it all up and we'd have the Artemis 1 mission underway. I'm wondering, is SLS proving to be a more complicated beast than you guys had assumed? Is this more? Are you finding these problems to be unexpected? And I'm wondering, or perhaps is this just a communications issue, and that there always was this potential? I mean, I do recall you gave us a bit of a history lesson when it came to the shuttle program, but again, this is the first I'm hearing that that there will have to be perhaps a multiple wet dress. And a second question. having to do with the various stages. Charlie Blackwell Thompson at a previous media teleconference outlined 3 different possible scenarios for the subsequent wet dress. I'm assuming that with the June wet dress and then an August launch that you will roll this thing back to the VAB. But I wouldn't mind having just some confirmation on that, on the steps that will happen following a subsequent successful wet dress. Sorry for my long-winded questions, but I look forward to your responses.
Sure, George. So I'll start with the second question. We will roll back again before launch. We had the 3 options that we were looking at. Our decision was to do the minimum that we needed to do to get back out to the pad as soon as possible, which is the path that we're on right now, which means we will roll back again. We have some work that we've deferred to the other side of wet dress, and then we have our final preps for launch, which include some of the flight termination system testing and installations and work with the range. So we will roll back again. As to your first question, you know, I wouldn't say that SLS is more complicated. We knew it was complicated. Certainly the check valve was something we didn't anticipate. It doesn't have anything to do with complexity. It's an issue that happened. I think some of the things we've seen about how we load locks and the interactions on the ground is something we didn't expect. But I will tell you that when we were able to start moving locks on both the second and third attempt, the team really understood the issue about the column of the hot locks flowing down from the ICPS and affecting how we were loading into the core stage. They understood that, I'd say, nearly immediately, and then came up with a fix. They talked about it, and then we implemented it. So I think it's one of those things that we iterate on. We're trying to be, upfront and tell you now, hey, we found some things, and we're not just going to take for granted that the next time we roll out there, everything's going to go great. We're trying to make sure that that, understand why we think that, because of what we've seen on these first 3 attempts. And I think you'll continue to hear from us that level of realism and approach, because I think the team has had it before, but also they need our support. And I say I mean those of us that sit here at headquarters to say, hey, let's get this right and get an optimistic schedule, so that we're sharing that with our stakeholders, of which you are all included in that, and also that we're managing the workload on this team, which has been going at it at a pretty high level for quite a while now.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ken Kramer of Space Up Close.
Oh, hi. Thank you for doing this and taking my question, and good luck with everything in the future. My question, I think, is for Cliff about the gaseous nitrogen work with Air Liquide. I'm wondering, since this impacted 2 of your wet dress rehearsals, if you might be verifying that this system is fully operational and able to support the wet dress before you actually start the countdown, rather than find this out during the countdown. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. We will be doing testing, verification, validation testing of the upgrades to the system. What we have done is our management team, our technical management team has worked with Air Liquide and our facility management director here to develop test procedures that will allow us to exercise the system in a way that will basically stress it more than we would expect during our WDR and launch campaigns. So when I say that, what I'm talking about is they've added margin to ensure the flow rates can be met. The test will actually run for 32 hours, and that's about a 10% margin over what we would expect to need during the actual launch campaign. So, yes, we will be testing. The team's been very involved with Air Liquide in developing that test plan, and we will be flowing nitrogen all the way out to the pad. Obviously, we will not have a vehicle there and a mobile launcher, but we'll basically put dampers out at the interface to the mobile launcher and be able to adjust and regulate to ensure we're getting the back pressures that the mobile launcher and vehicle would put on the system, again, in an effort to make sure we're stressing the system to meet our needs.
Thank you. Our next question is from Stephen Clark of Spaceflight Now.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Sorry for that glitch earlier. Just wanted to follow up on an earlier question from Irene. I think Jim Free mentioned there will be commentary for the next WDR. Will this be like on NASA TV, or are you talking about the Twitter updates that we saw for the previous WDR attempts? And also, what's the target date that you're looking at for returning the SLS to 39B? Thanks.
Stephen, I can answer the question about the commentary. Right now, we're looking at having that on the YouTube stream, but we're still working through those details. So we'll make sure to share that with you all when we've worked all those plans out.
And then based on the schedule going back out to the pad, it's, Cliff mentioned the work that we have and the things we need to understand about, especially about the check valve, and then the getting the nitrogen system up and running and tested. So that puts us probably in the late May timeframe for rolling out and a wet dress in early June. It's about, Cliff, correct me, like 12 to 14 days once we get out to the pad before we can do a wet dress.
You're correct, Jim.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from Daniel Reguera from our Drone UI.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muchas gracias. Thank you for taking my question. We have a really great, large audience in Spanish. You told that the next days, probably dates for the launch will be in August. If during the August window it is not possible to launch, when would be the next opportunity?
Yeah, so we have launch periods, planned for the entire rest of the year based on our conditions, which I'll remind everybody, our conditions for when we launch is that we have a daylight landing, which drives our when we launch, and our and the orbital mechanics drive it as well, but it's driven by when we launch so that we can land in the daylight. But we have launch periods planned, through the end of the year.
Thank you. Our next question is from Filip Otolski from Polish Public Television.
Hi, and thank you for taking my question. So what was the most unexpected problem you encountered during wet dress rehearsal and the whole testing?
What was, I'm sorry, what was the most unexpected?
Yes, that's right.
Wow, I would say probably the interactions between the ground and the flight system, and learning how that interaction drove us to change our plans. The example I gave earlier about the LOX loading would be my take. I'll let Cliff weigh in here too.
Well, I guess I would agree with that, Jim, as well as, finding the hydrogen leak. Again, that's never something you want to see, but, that was something we were not anticipating. But, again, we were able to quickly, what I feel, diagnose that and hopefully got that resolved, and we'll find out during the next WDR. And I would say the check valve is turning out to be a little more again, it's not, during the testing, we had a way to continue with testing, but that's turning out that finding that root cause is turning into a little more of a challenge for us.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. We'll take it from Manuel Mazzanti from Debate.
Hi, how are you? I'm Manuel Mazzanti, covering the space program in Spanish. You just mentioned that we do have launch windows beyond August. We We used to have the information from May, June, and July with the specific dates. And I understand we have a July 26th, August 9th, which I'm assuming would be the last day of the early August. Then you mentioned August 24th, August 25th. That window is only 2 days, or it extends until the end of August. And I wonder if we can have precise dates towards the end of the year. Thank you.
Sure. So the launch period 25, the first day is August 23rd. That launch period runs through August 29th. So it's multiple, it runs to August 29th, and then we have a break in 25, launch period 25, that then picks up on September 2nd and ends September 6th. I think Catherine Hamilton's going to follow up on the remaining launch periods with you.
Yep, you can reach out to me by email, and I'll provide more details on that. And so that's all the time that we have for questions. Jim, would you like to give any closing remarks?
Sure. First, thank you all for your time today, and as I mentioned, for your interest. This is really hard work, and I would say that regardless of where you sit when you roll a launch vehicle out for the first time, it's difficult, but it's also really rewarding. And for me, coming back to the agency, it's really cool to be part of this team and this program and be there to watch them work. The challenges we've encountered that we've talked here, other than the check valve, have really been not associated with the Orion spacecraft and SLS, and that's really remarkable for a new system. It's the challenges have been, as we just talked about, operating the new ground systems for the first time, how the two interact. We've found a way to address them. We've achieved some of our wet dress objectives already, and that's attributed to the problem-solving skills that our NASA and jointly with our contractors, their problem-solving skills. And we have a plan for the future with some margin built in with the wet dress multiple attempts. We know what we have to accomplish both in the VAB that Cliff and his team will do on this pit stop, and Charlie knows what she needs to do when we get out to the pad, and that's the path that we're on. And we want to make sure you understand those issues. We want you to know that we're going to continue to communicate with you the way the team has to date and what we've tried to do here today. And sharing our story is incredibly important. And I hope you see that we're trying to do that. This news about the live commentary hopefully starts to help some of the concerns there. I know it doesn't take them all away, but I assure you, as I mentioned, that we'll continue to attack it. And look forward to talking to you all in the future, hopefully on the other side of a positive wet dress test.
Thank you all for joining us today. You can listen to a replay of this teleconference online by visiting the Media Resources tab at nasa.gov/Artemis-1 later this afternoon. To follow along with updates for wet dress rehearsal test and the Artemis 1 mission, please go to the Artemis blog at blog.nasa.gov/Artemis. Thanks again, and that will conclude our call.
That concludes today's call. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.